She bought the unit for $500, a dusty red door and a gut feeling. Claire Jensen thought she was scoring scrap metal and maybe a few tools, something she could flip for parts and rent. But when she pulled back the tarp and saw what was hidden inside, she realized this wasn't just storage. It was a message in steel, and what started as a mechanic's gamble would turn into a journey through memory, mystery, and a woman's unfinished story that refused to stay buried. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from, and if stories about lost legacies and second chances speak to you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's story might just leave you breathless. Let's begin. The dust hit hard that morning, thick, sunlit, and swirling like memory. Claire Jensen squinted against the dry wind, her boots crunching over gravel as she stepped up to Unit #217. The door was fire engine red, faded with time, the kind of color that used to scream but now whispered. She'd bought it sight unseen at the county auction, one of those last-minute impulse bids nobody else wanted. $500. Could be junk, could be nothing, but something about it, the location, the silence, the way the auctioneer hesitated made her palms itch. Claire was a mechanic, not a gambler. She didn't chase ghost stories or thrill, but lately, the shop had been quiet, too quiet. Business was dry, rent was due, and her father's old wrench set, passed down and still stained with his fingerprints, had been sitting untouched on her bench for weeks. She needed a win, or at least a distraction. The lock clattered to the dirt with a tired snap. The metal door groaned as she pulled it up, and the sunlight spilled in like it wasn't supposed to. Inside, the unit smelled like old rubber and time. There were no shelves, no boxes, no stacks of forgotten junk. Just one thing, a shape under a gray tarp, tall, hulking, precise, like someone had placed it there with purpose. Claire stepped inside slowly, her boots echoing against the concrete. The air changed, cooler, heavier. She knelt beside the object and ran her hand along the tarp's edge, military grade. The stitching, the weight, the reinforced corners, this wasn't storage room filler. It was deliberate. She took a breath, then yanked the tarp. It collapsed with a whisper, revealing what lay beneath. A motorcycle. No, the motorcycle. Matte black, hardened frame, tank painted in camouflage that had faded to a dusty olive green, tires intact, engine sealed. A tiny stenciled nameplate above the headlamp read, RH07ER. The serial number was unfamiliar, but the style wasn't. This was wartime design, Cold War, maybe even earlier, and it was beautiful. Claire took a slow step back, heart ticking faster now. Something about the bike didn't sit right. It wasn't just the condition. It was too intact, too expectant, like it had been waiting for someone who'd know how to bring it back to life. She looked down at her boots, at the dirt floor, and then at the corner of the unit where something else caught her eye. A metal box, glove box sized, locked, but not sealed. And on top of it, taped in place, was a yellowing photo, a woman in uniform, smiling, standing next to this very motorcycle. In bold red pen, a name was scrawled across the bottom, Evelyn Rhodes. Claire stared at it for a long time, and then, quietly, she whispered, "What the hell did I just buy?" The photo felt heavier than it should have. Claire held it in one hand as she unlatched the small metal box with the other. It wasn't locked, just stuck from time and grime. With a bit of force and a muttered curse, it popped open, sending a puff of musty air into her face. Inside, a single key brass, dull, worn to a soft curve, like it had been handled 1,000 times, and a folded scrap of paper with 5 numbers written in blocky, uneven handwriting. 34.8921, negative 117.4013, coordinates. Claire blinked. She hadn't expected much, maybe old receipts, maybe rusted tools. But this was starting to feel intentional, like someone had planted a trail and left it hidden beneath the dust for the right hands to find. The woman in the photo, Evelyn Rhodes, stood tall in her fatigues, helmet tilted back, chin lifted. She wasn't posing. She was declaring. Claire didn't recognize the insignia on her sleeve. Not Army, not Marines, something more obscure. She reached for her phone. No signal in the lot, but she pulled up the map app anyway and typed in the coordinates. A red pin dropped somewhere outside Barstow, middle of nowhere. No street names, no businesses, just a dead patch of land in the desert and a faded service road nearby. Claire looked back at the motorcycle. The handlebars were tight, the brake lines clean. It was too well preserved. The tires had some wear, but not enough to suggest years of abandonment. Someone had maintained this, stored it deliberately. And judging by the military tarp and the strategic placement, it wasn't just for sentimental reasons. She circled the bike, eyes scanning every bolt and seam. The seat was reinforced leather, no rips. The tank had faint scratches, but they looked more like field wear than neglect. And then she noticed the plate welded under the chassis, not a VIN, but a stamped emblem, a spade with wings. Claire narrowed her eyes. She'd seen something like that before, in one of her father's old military vehicle books, the kind he used to read after work when the shop was dark and he still had grease under his nails. A covert unit? Special reconnaissance? Maybe just a defunct division. She'd have to dig deeper. But first, the engine. Claire grabbed a socket wrench from her truck and crouched low, working the bolts loose one by one. The access panel creaked, and she leaned in with a flashlight. No corrosion. The spark plugs were clean. Oil hadn't turned to sludge. In fact, it looked like it had been run recently. She turned back to the photo, then to the coordinates. This wasn't just a relic. It was a trailhead. She stood up slowly, brushing off her jeans. Something buzzed in her chest, a kind of electricity she hadn't felt in years. Since before the shop started bleeding money. Since before her father passed. It was the feeling of a puzzle unfolding, one she might actually want to solve. Claire slid the key into her jacket pocket and stared at the bike again. She didn't know who Evelyn Rhodes was, not yet. But she had a feeling this motorcycle wasn't just transport. It was a message, and someone, somewhere, was waiting for it to be heard. Claire didn't sleep that night. Not really. She lay in bed with the photo on the nightstand and the coordinates scrawled onto a receipt beside it. The key stayed in her jacket pocket, the weight of it a quiet reminder pressed against her ribs. By morning, the dust on her boots hadn't even settled and neither had her mind. She pulled into the shop just after sunrise. The motorcycle sat where she'd left it, the tarp now folded neatly in the corner. Something about the machine's presence in the space made the whole garage feel different, quieter. Like even the tools were listening. Claire set the photo on her workbench and turned on her laptop. A quick online search of Evelyn Rhodes brought up dozens of names, none of them helpful. She added in military, motorcycle, California, still nothing. But after narrowing it by date and location, something pinged in the archives of an old veterans forum, a black and white photo uploaded nearly 20 years ago. It showed the same bike, unmistakable in its design, parked beside a group of uniformed women. The caption read, "Special Engineering Unit, Nevada 1967. Rhodes, 2nd from left." Claire leaned in closer. It was her. Same defiant posture, same eyes. She clicked deeper into the post. The user who uploaded it hadn't been active in years, but their profile included a name, Wallace G. Everett. A quick people search turned up an address, a P.O. box out near the Mojave Edge. Claire's heart thudded. That was just a few miles from the coordinates. It couldn't be a coincidence. By noon, she was on the road, the key tucked inside her glove compartment, the photo wrapped in a shop rag and placed in her backpack. The motorcycle couldn't be risked. Not yet. So she took her truck and a full tank of gas, following the winding back roads east until the city gave way to sand and memory. The coordinates led her to a dirt turnout beyond an old cattle fence. No signage, no markers. Just a wind-battered mailbox with a missing flag. She parked, stepped out, and let the stillness wrap around her. The air was dry enough to taste. Claire followed the coordinates on foot until the land dipped slightly, just enough to reveal the edge of a hidden foundation. There, half sunken in sand and surrounded by brittle weeds, sat a small concrete slab. And just beyond it, tucked between two dying Joshua trees, a cabin, wood weathered silver, curtains drawn. Smoke curling faintly from a stovepipe chimney. She hesitated, then knocked. No answer. She was about to try again when the door creaked open a few inches. An older man stared back at her, face carved by sun and time. His eyes dropped to the photo in her hand before she even spoke. "That her bike?" he asked, voice like gravel. Claire nodded. "Your Wallace?" He nodded once. "I found it in a storage unit outside Bakersfield. I think it belonged to Evelyn Rhodes." The man didn't speak at first, just opened the door wider and stepped back, waving her inside with a single gesture. "I was wondering when someone would come looking," he said. "She told me one day someone would." Claire stepped over the threshold. And just like that, Evelyn's ghost became real. The cabin smelled like cedar and dust. Old maps curled on a wooden table. A kettle hissed softly on the stove. Claire stood just inside the doorway, unsure if she was trespassing on a stranger's grief or stepping into a story that had been waiting years to be told. Wallace didn't speak right away. He moved slowly, with the kind of wear that settles into a man's bones after decades of carrying unspoken things. He poured her tea without asking if she wanted any, handed it over, and sat down in a chair that creaked beneath him like it knew the weight of his silence. "I knew Evelyn in '66, he said finally, eyes locked on a point just past Claire's shoulder. "We were both in a development program out of Fallon. Black project. You won't find it on any maps. Wasn't just weapons, though. Some of it was transport. Experimental machines." Claire's breath caught. "Like the bike," he nodded slowly. "Except that wasn't a bike. Not just." Evelyn called it Echo. Said it responded to its rider. Learned from them. Adjusted itself. Claire shook her head in disbelief. "What, like AI?" "No, not that fancy. More intuitive. Like the frame remembered pressure. The throttle recalibrated itself. Fuel efficiency off the charts. Could go over 100 miles without needing a refill. But it wasn't just about distance. It was built to move in silence. For evac runs, intelligence drops, smuggling people out of bad places. It was fast, Claire. And smart. Claire sat down across from him, her tea forgotten. Why store it in a unit? Why not keep it with the military? Because the military didn't want it anymore. Not after what happened to her team in '68. They shut the program down, buried it. But Evelyn, she didn't let it go. She took the prototype before they could scrap it, hid it. Said one day, someone would need it again. Someone not afraid to listen. Claire thought of how easily the engine had responded when she'd twisted the throttle the night before. Like it had been waiting. Like it had chosen her. "I'm not military," she said quietly. Wallace smiled for the first time, and it was both sad and knowing. Neither was she not, really. Not the way they wanted. She believed machines had souls, that they carried things when people couldn't. Grief, hope, secrets. Evelyn didn't hide that bike to protect herself. She did it to preserve a truth no one wanted to hear. Claire's mind reeled. This wasn't just some forgotten relic. This was a piece of engineering buried beneath layers of time and secrecy. A weapon reimagined as a rescue. A memory encoded in steel and silence. Wallace leaned forward and placed something on the table, a small patch. The spade with wings. She left one for whoever found it. Said they'd know what to do next. You found her message. Now it's up to you. That night, Claire rolled the motorcycle out into the alley behind her shop. She checked the oil again. Spark plug. Fuel line. Every inch pristine. She turned the key. It started on the first try. The machine didn't roar. It whispered, as if it knew she was listening. Claire rode with no destination, just instinct, the hum of the engine steady beneath her, the wind biting sharp as the sun dipped low. The city blurred behind her, replaced by stretches of dry highway and the occasional hawk overhead. There was something strange about riding the bike. It didn't just move, it responded, leaned before she told it to, adjusted to the curves like it knew them before they came. Every bump in the road felt softened, translated. It was eerie, but not unsettling, more like riding with a memory. She pulled off at a gas station on the edge of nowhere, the kind that looked like it hadn't updated its prices since the 90 seconds. An old man behind the counter didn't even glance up from his magazine. Claire filled the tank out of habit more than needed, barely took any fuel, and checked the map taped to her tank bag. She hadn't planned to go to the coordinates again, but her hands steered the handlebars that way anyway. As the motorcycle crested a ridge and dipped into the desert valley where the coordinates had first led her, something strange happened. The headlight flickered once, then adjusted brightness on its own. The suspension shifted, tightened slightly. Claire sat up straighter. The terrain was smooth, but the bike was preparing, anticipating. The road ended in dirt, then gravel, then a dry creek bed that looked like it hadn't seen water in decades. The bike didn't stall, didn't even stutter. It kept moving until Claire saw a low metal fence mostly buried in sand, the outline of a perimeter. She killed the engine and stepped off, boots crunching in the dust. The silence was complete. No birds, no wind, just the faint sound of metal ticking as the engine cooled. Then she saw it, a faded sign, half buried under a tumbleweed. Property of U.S. military installation, 27A. Trespassers will be prosecuted. The letters were almost gone, sun-bleached and flaking. Claire didn't know what she expected to find, but what she did find made her stop breathing for a second. A series of rusted-out metal sheds, camouflaged into the rock, half buried, all locked tight. Except one. One had its door cracked open, just slightly, like someone had been there recently or hadn't quite shut it all the way, on purpose. She pulled it open slowly. Inside, the air was still and stale, thick with the scent of oil and cold metal. Old equipment lined the walls, racks of tools, disassembled panels, faded blueprints curling at the corners. And in the center of the room, a workbench covered in dust, except for one clean rectangle. A space where something had recently been removed. The bike, this was its birthplace. Claire took a shaky breath. There were documents here, 2 files stamped with redacted names, Project Echo, scrawled across multiple pages, and photos of Evelyn standing in front of various machines. She looked younger in these, determined, focused. There were handwritten notes in the margins, underlined passages, adaptable mechanics, tactile memory, in-frame response, mission, ready, classified. Evelyn R. Test Rider. She opened a drawer. Inside was a sealed envelope. Her name was written on it, Claire Jensen. No return address, no date. Just her name in pen, the same handwriting as the coordinates. She backed away from the bench, heart pounding. Someone had known she'd find this. Someone had left her a message from beyond the grave. And Evelyn Rhodes wasn't just part of this story, she was still writing it. Claire held the envelope like it might catch fire. Her name, written in confident, slanted strokes, stared back at her, impossibly present in this forgotten room. She hadn't told anyone she was coming out here, hadn't even planned it until this morning, and yet, here it was, waiting. She sat down on the edge of the workbench, brushed dust off her jeans, and peeled the flap open with trembling fingers. Inside was a single page, yellowed with age but untouched by weather. The ink was steady, clean, direct. Claire, if you're reading this, it means you found the unit. Found her. I can't know who you are, not exactly. But if Echo let you near her, it means something. She doesn't respond to just anyone. She was made for speed, for silence, for the ones who needed to disappear quietly and reappear when it mattered. And she was meant to stay hidden until the world was ready to understand her story. Asterisk. There are people who want Echo buried. Not because she's dangerous, but because she works. She's proof of something they'd rather pretend failed. They shut us down when we got too close to making a machine that could think with a heart. I couldn't destroy her, couldn't let them smelt down everything we built. So I ran. I wrapped her in secrecy, stashed her in layers of silence. I figured one day, someone like you might come along, someone who'd feel it in their bones when they touched the throttle. Someone who still believed in machines with soul. There's more hidden in Echo than just tech, and more to me than the uniform in that photo. You'll find answers in the frame. You'll need tools, patience, and someone who knows how to read between the welds. But more than anything, you'll need to listen. Finish what I couldn't. Tell the story. If not for me, then for all the ones who disappeared trying to make something good out of something secret. Evelyn Rhodes. Claire read the letter 3 times. Then, a 4th. Her hands shook. Her throat burned. It wasn't just a message. It was a mission. One passed down not with rank or orders, but through trust. She looked around the shed again, taking in the blueprints on the walls. The half-torn photos pinned to corkboard, candid shots of riders in motion, equations scribbled over wiring diagrams. This place wasn't just a lab. It was a shrine to a dream buried under decades of red tape and silence. She slid the letter carefully into her backpack and walked outside, blinking against the desert light. The bike stood where she'd parked it, engine still warm. As she approached, she noticed something she hadn't before. A slight bulge under the right side panel, a seam that didn't line up quite right. Almost invisible, unless you were looking for it. Her fingers traced the edge. The panel didn't click. It unfolded. Inside. Not wires or parts, but a hollow, just big enough to hide something important. She didn't touch it yet. She just stared, pulse thudding in her ears. Evelyn hadn't just left a letter. She'd left a trail. One lined with metal, memory, and the kind of ghosts you don't exorcise, you honor. Claire didn't know what she'd find next, but she knew this much. The story wasn't ending here. It was just starting to open. Back in her garage, the desert dust still on her boots, Claire laid the bike onto a padded lift and stared at the hidden compartment beneath the panel. It wasn't the kind of modification you'd make for performance or style. It was surgical, intentional. The kind of alteration done by someone who didn't want anyone else to find it unless they knew it was there. Inside the hollow was a tightly wrapped bundle, canvas and oil-stained. Claire's hands were steady as she peeled it back. There, folded and weathered but preserved, were a set of classified-looking documents stamped "Ease Only," and several black and white photographs, some of Evelyn alone with the bike, others with groups of people, faces mostly turned away from the camera. One photo had names scrawled on the back. All were crossed out, save for Evelyn's. The folder was thick. Technical diagrams, test reports, surveillance logs, and then a map. It wasn't marked with cities or highways, just military zones, abandoned bases, supply routes once used and then erased. The kind of map you couldn't buy, the kind that whispered truths no one was supposed to hear. Claire spread the map across her workbench and leaned over it. Many of the coordinates matched old Cold War installations, places now boarded up or bulldozed flat. But one of them, circled twice in red, sat near an old rail depot just outside of Victorville. It had been decommissioned in 1981. Nothing official had happened there since. But next to it, in Evelyn's handwriting, was one word: transfer. Claire traced the letters with her thumb. This wasn't just about the motorcycle. It was about what it had carried, what it was used for. And Evelyn hadn't been running from something, she'd been running with something, smuggling it out, hiding it inside Echo. Claire remembered Wallace's words. She wasn't military the way they wanted. Maybe because she wasn't just a rider. Maybe she was a courier. Maybe she was the last link in a chain of people trying to get something out before the lights went off and the doors slammed shut. Later that night, Claire pulled out her dad's old toolbox, the heavy one with the warped drawers and handwritten torque specs in faded marker. She needed precision tools for the next step. The engine compartment had more seams than it should. It wasn't just hollow for weight. It was a vault. She started disassembling it piece by piece. Every bolt came off clean. No rust. No fight. Almost like it wanted to be opened. Inside the lower fairing, she found another envelope, this one heat-sealed in thick plastic. Inside, a stack of microfilm reels and a badge. Evelyn Rhodes, Clearance Level 7, Agency. Redacted. Claire sat back on her heels, floored. Whatever Evelyn had gotten involved in, it wasn't just mechanical. It was deep cover, off-grid. And she'd taken the ultimate risk by storing it inside the thing she loved most. Echo wasn't just a bike. It was a witness, a carrier. And Claire? She was no longer just a mechanic. She was becoming the story's final link. It was late when the knock came. Almost midnight. Claire was still in the garage, sleeves rolled up, grease on her cheek, surrounded by open folders and half-disassembled parts of a motorcycle that had turned into a confession booth. The knock wasn't loud, just firm. Certain. She wiped her hands and opened the bay door. The man who stood there wasn't a stranger, not entirely. He had the kind of presence that felt pre-introduced. Military posture, clean-shaved, a deep crease between his brows like he'd forgotten how to soften his face. He wore civilian clothes, khaki jacket, black boots, button-up shirt, but his silence said, "Government," louder than a badge ever could. "You're Claire Jensen," he said. It wasn't a question. "Depends who's asking," she replied, crossing her arms. He stepped forward and pulled something from his pocket, a photo. The same photo she had found in the glove box. Evelyn, standing beside Echo. But this copy had been scanned, copied, filed, aged with handling. "I've been looking for that bike for 13 years, he said. Claire didn't answer. He continued, "We called it Echo 1. She was the last prototype of a recovery program so classified most people in the Pentagon didn't even know it existed. Rhodes was the lead field engineer. She disappeared in '81. We assumed she'd gone dark, maybe defected, but now..." He looked around the garage, gaze lingering on the open blueprints and documents. "Now, I think she was trying to save it." Claire studied him. "You're not here to take it back, are you?" He didn't answer right away, just looked at the bike like it had come back from the dead. His voice softened, almost to a whisper. "I trained under her, briefly, before she left. They said she quit. Said she went soft. But that wasn't it. Evelyn believed the machine could do more than follow orders. She wanted to prove a person, and a machine could connect emotionally, strategically, humanely. The brass called it a liability." Claire stepped between him and the bike. "So what now? You take it, bury it again, or worse?" He shook his head. "No, I'm not here to reclaim anything. I'm here to warn you." A beat passed. The air in the garage felt heavier. There are still people who don't want Echo resurfacing. Not because of what it is, but what it proves. The microfilm? The badge? That's proof of programs they swore didn't exist. People disappeared to keep them quiet. Evelyn ran to protect them. And this machine. Claire swallowed hard. "So what happens to me?" "That depends," he said. "On what you do next." He pulled a small notebook from his coat, tore out a page, and handed it to her. "Coordinates. Again. Mechanic like you? You'll know what to do when you get there." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing," he added. "She left a log, a rider's log. It wasn't in the bike. We believe it's still at the last safe house she used, hidden in plain sight." Claire stared at the page in her hand, heart pounding. Another trail. "Why now?" she called after him. He looked back over his shoulder, eyes tired. "Because you're the only one who hasn't run from it." Then he was gone, and Claire was alone again, with a half-open machine and a legacy that refused to stay buried. Claire stared at the coordinates long after the man was gone. They burned on the page like they had a heartbeat, insistent, quiet, unrelenting. She barely slept. At dawn, she loaded up her truck with a small toolkit, a portable light, and her father's old socket set the one she only used when something truly mattered. The location was less than an hour away. A crumbling auto yard on the edge of Lancaster, California. No signs, no gate, just acres of rusted vehicles and sun-scorched debris. Claire parked just outside and walked in slowly, every instinct on edge. The coordinates led her to the rear of the property, where a collapsed garage leaned into itself like it was tired of standing. Inside, among engine blocks and stripped transmissions, sat a rusted-out Willys Jeep. Its frame was cracked, tires shredded, but its interior, strangely, was spotless, preserved. She reached under the passenger seat, half expecting rats or dust. Instead, she found a metal lockbox, cold and perfectly square. It took 3 of her tools and a deep breath to open it. Inside was a small leather-bound book, weathered and cracked along the spine, and a thick metal key unlike anything she'd seen before. Rounded edges, strange teeth, and a central groove that looked almost hand-machined. No label, no number. But tucked in the back of the book was a final note. Echo's final vault requires this key. Do not force it. If it opens, it was meant to. If it doesn't, walk away. Claire ran her fingers along the leather. The book was Evelyn's rider's log. But it wasn't just about the bike. It was filled with observations, sketches, and moments that felt more like diary entries than mechanical records. She described how Echo adjusted to terrain without input, how the fuel efficiency doubled in cold weather, how it once refused to start when a man she didn't trust touched the handlebars. Evelyn had given Echo something more than design. She had given her instinct. There were dates, locations, all lining up with places Claire had seen marked on the secret map back in the lab. There were mentions of hidden compartments, secondary batteries, encrypted frame welds. One entry stood out. July 9th, 1980. 1 frame lock installed. Final cache secured. If they find me, they'll never find her heart. Only someone who listens can open her. Claire drove straight back to her garage, the sun barely rising behind her. She wheeled Echo into the center bay and took a breath that trembled more than she'd admit. Using Evelyn's sketches, she located a reinforced joint in the center of the frame beneath the fuel tank. The welds were clean, too clean, almost seamless, but just barely visible was a narrow slot. The strange metal key slid in perfectly. For a second, nothing happened. Then a soft click, like the sound of a door unlocking somewhere far away. Claire slowly pulled back the frame cover. Inside was a small sealed case. She opened it, heart thudding. Inside, a flash drive, a folded photograph, and a vial of something clear. Not labeled, not explained. The photograph showed Evelyn standing beside a man in uniform, hand on his shoulder, smiling. Behind them, a lab. On the back, in Evelyn's handwriting, he designed the override. I hid it in the only place no one would look inside a story no one wanted to believe. Claire stared down at the drive. Whatever was on it, Evelyn had risked everything to keep it from disappearing, and now it was in her hands. Claire didn't open the flash drive right away. She sat with it for a while at her workbench, Evelyn's rider's log open beside her, the strange vial still sealed in its foam cutout. The shop lights flickered overhead the same way they always had, but the silence felt different now, charged, like the calm just before a storm. She knew that once she clicked it open, there was no going back. When she finally did, the screen took a long second to wake. Then, a folder appeared. Echo, Core. Inside it were encrypted schematics, communications logs, and a final recorded message. Claire hit play. Evelyn's voice came through the tinny speakers, older than in the photos, but steady. If you're listening to this, you found her. You found me. I don't know your name, but I know your hands, the kind that don't flinch when the bolts are rusted and the truth is heavier than steel. Echo wasn't just my project. She was my legacy. My message to the future. A proof that machinery could carry not just weight, but meaning. And when the people in charge realized that, They tried to erase her. The message cut to video Evelyn sitting in what looked like the very lab Claire had visited in the desert. She looked tired, but determined. Her eyes burned with unfinished purpose. They'll tell you she's dangerous, that she can't be trusted. But the danger was never Echo. It was the idea that empathy and innovation could share the same frame, that a machine could feel what we couldn't say. Claire swallowed hard. It wasn't just a confession. It was a manifesto. The drive included files Evelyn had smuggled out. Evidence of failed missions, missing operatives, black-budget tech developments, scrubbed from history. She hadn't run to protect herself. She'd run to protect the truth. Claire copied the files to a separate drive and locked the original in a safe. Not because she was afraid, but because she was now responsible. She didn't go to the press. Not yet. She went to the people who would understand. She brought the logbook and photos to Wallace. She showed the badge and microfilm to a retired journalist who'd once covered military overreach in the 80 seconds. And she started something Evelyn had only dreamed of, a quiet movement of mechanics, tinkerers, veterans, and believers. Echo wasn't restored to showroom polish. She was rebuilt bolt by bolt intentionally. Claire didn't erase the scars or hide the welded seams. She honored them. The first time she rode her again after the full rebuild, she didn't go far, just to the edge of town and back. But something had shifted. Not in the bike. In her. She didn't feel like she was chasing someone else's story anymore. She was carrying it forward. Months passed. Then a year. Echo's legend grew in whispers, not headlines. Claire started teaching at the community shop where her dad used to volunteer. Young women showed up with questions about engines and ended up learning about integrity. Veterans came by just to look at the bike. And a quiet line began to form, people bringing their own echoes. Lost machines, buried dreams, forgotten stories. Claire helped them all, not because she wanted recognition, but because Evelyn had given her a map, and she had decided to follow it. One night, alone in the garage, Claire stood beside the bike, the shop quiet except for the tick of the cooling engine. She touched the frame, thumb grazing the slot where the key had turned. She whispered, "We did it." The wind outside shifted. The lights buzzed gently, and for a second, just long enough to doubt, the bike hummed back. Claire Jensen, the mechanic who bought a mystery storage unit for $500, had uncovered more than a machine. She uncovered a mission, a legacy, and most of all, a reason. And now, the road ahead wasn't just open, it was waiting.